Hello and welcome. I'm Vicky Hodges, your Fully Told podcast host. This podcast brings together lived experience and expert insight to create open and honest conversations around endometriosis and infertility. Every story shared is to help others feel seen, challenge stigma, build empathy, and support advocacy. So whether you're listening for yourself or someone else, thank you for being here and welcome to Fully Told. Hi, I'm Vicky Hodges, your host of Fully Told, and today I am here with Marina Gerner. She is an award-winning journalist, adjunct professor at NYU London, and the author of The Vagina Business, which is a book that explores the innovations set to transform women's health. It's been recommended as the Book of the Month by Financial Times. It's won the Porchlight Business Book for Innovation and Creativity, and also the Mind Valley Book Club Award. So incredible stuff. Marina and I met through a mutual friend on a WhatsApp group last year, and I'm incredibly honoured to have you on today, Marina, to talk about the vagina business.
Thank you so much for having me.
I would love to start by saying that your work started out kind of as a financial journalist. And I know you've said that, everything it's never really about finance. It's everything that's seen through the lens of finance and business. So love for you to start by doing a little intro about how that ethos has shaped your work and especially the book.
Yeah, thank you so much for picking up on that. That's a great question. So I did a PhD in my early 20s, and then I was freelancing as a journalist at the same time. And once I finished the PhD, I went full time into journalism as a financial journalist. And I think there are some parallels between writing about money and writing about vaginas, because both are taboo topics, and both are things that people, don't talk about openly, don't know about enough. But once you know about these things, it's actually very powerful, and you can advocate for yourself and make things happen. So that's one parallel I see. But in a more practical way, I was writing about finance, and then I went freelance and I started writing about health and about technology as well. But I think what's fascinating is that finance underlies everything else. So when I started the research for my book, I was in my early 30s, and I knew that I wanted to have a child soon. And I also knew that 9 in 10 first time mothers experience a birth injury.
Mm.
So that was something that was on my mind. And I'm one of those people who likes to be very prepared for everything. So I did a lot of research into how to prevent birth injuries. And I found this company in California called Materna Medical that's created a birth dilator, a very simple device that can pre-stretch the muscles of the vaginal canal. And the idea is that by the time the baby comes through, your muscles have been pre-stretched so that hopefully you're less likely to experience a birth injury and less likely to experience pelvic organ prolapse later down the line. And I thought that's such a great idea. And it's such a simple thing. It's nothing overly complicated or overly invasive. It's just a dilator. And those are used in other areas of health as well. So I spoke to the CEO, Tracy McNeil, and I learned two things. One was that the last big innovation in the standard of care of birth was the epidural, which was popularized in the 90s. And I thought, there's no other area of technology or society where we bring people something that's many decades old and we say, hey, look at this cutting edge floppy disk. But in birth, that's kind of what happens. There's also the forceps, which is basically a set of salad forks, and that's many centuries old, and vacuum delivery, which is basically a toilet plunger. So I was a bit shocked to learn about these things. And then I started speaking to more founders in what I call the vagina-centric space. And I learned that they struggle to raise money because most VC investors, so that's venture capital investors, those are investors who focus on innovative companies and tech
Mm.
companies. And most of them are men. And so they're too embarrassed to talk about vaginas in a business setting. And for that reason, they're less likely to invest in companies like that. And I thought that was just so shocking to learn that that's one of the reasons for why we don't get the innovation that we clearly need and want and deserve, is because there is a bunch of guys somewhere and they're too embarrassed to talk about vaginas So I have this quote in the book of an investor who says, "I don't want to talk about vaginas in my Monday morning partner meeting."
I think we should make it a thing that you have to talk about vaginas in your Monday morning meeting.
Yeah, I was thinking of getting mugs that say, "I want to talk about vaginas in my Monday morning partner meeting."
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's definitely a phrase that I come back to in the book. And that takes me back to your question. You can look at innovation in the space, you can look at research, but if there's no funding for it, you're not going to find anything.
Yeah, it's such a shame. I think you said that like 90% of investors in the US and UK are men. And like you said, they don't want to talk about vaginas. And obviously the title of your book and the cover of your book is obviously very bold. And yeah, what reactions have you had to
Yeah. So yeah, I'm glad you're saying that, because the idea was to have exactly that, to reply to that particular situation of people not wanting to talk about vaginas in a business setting. So that's exactly why I put these two words and I put them on the cover, and then I had to fight for them to stay on the cover, because when my
really?
agent and I went out to talk to publishers, we had lots of people saying this is a brilliant book, but you'll have to think about the title, you'll have to change the title. And I was told that by pretty much every
Which is basically what you're fighting against in the first place.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And oftentimes the explanation was, well, every publishing team has a sales team that goes out to Waterstones or Amazon and they pitch the book to those people. And oftentimes there are men on the sales team. But even if they're women, if they're embarrassed by the title, then they're not going to pitch the book very well. So that's a problem. And then we ended up selling the book to the biggest women founded publishing house in the United States. And so I thought, okay, now we're sorted and they fully get it. And they did. But then they started getting feedback from independent bookstores in the United States saying, with that title, it's too much. We're not going to put it in our windows. We're not going to put it in our newsletters. And so my editor, who always liked the title, but she had to tell me about this feedback. So she sent me an email saying, "Marina, please can you come up with 16 alternative titles for the book?"
And it's like, you are there. This is to disrupt the status quo. This is what it's all about. You're bringing
Yeah,
awareness to a
yeah,
topic that
yeah,
needs to be addressed.
exactly. The whole point is to destigmatize and to, show that there's an issue here. But I did come up with 16 alternative titles. I called two of my best friends and we had a quick brainstorming session. We came up with other titles. Some of them were like "When Women Are Well," a
Well,
very different vibe and ultimately not the actual name of the book. And then my publisher tested all of these titles on our target audience. And guess which title won?
the vagina business.
That's right, the Vagina Business. So we actually had the data to show, look, people like this title. It
Yeah.
energizes them. They're tired of euphemisms.
Yeah.
They want something that, is bold. And so it became, or it stayed, the Vagina Business.
Yeah.
And I thought, okay, great, this is sorted. But then it keeps coming up again and again and again. So when the book was published, I was looking for a venue for my book launch. And there was a venue that turned me down right away, purely based on the book title, because they had some links to a charity that I think was anti-abortion. So anyway, wasn't the right place anyway. But that came up. Then there was an author who refused to give me an endorsement purely based on the title, because she said, "Oh, it's a great book, but I don't think it should be called that." And then I've had readers message me saying they've written a review on Amazon, which is super helpful. Amazon reviews, Goodread reviews, they're all really good for books. But because they mentioned the word vagina in the review, that was censored.
Goodness, censorship. It's just unreal for women's health.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that also happens when I speak at events. Sometimes the post gets taken down, or oftentimes I realize that the organizer doesn't mention the title to begin with, but they'll just say journalist and author. So that happens. And then the book won 2 awards. And in one case, the award was given in Dubai. And the organizer called me a few weeks beforehand, and she said, I won't be able to say the title of your book on stage. They would shut down the whole event. So she gave me the award in Amsterdam instead at a different event.
Isn't it such a shame that like misogyny has literally, it's this kind of, women have been denied the support for their health for so long. And I think it just shows that those were the supporters of the title. You know, you did the research and they said, I think it's because we're so sick of being dismissed. We're so fed up of not having our voices heard and being able to support ourselves. And if we're not talking about it, we don't know stuff. We can't empower ourselves to live healthier lives and know what problems are and get diagnoses earlier and the support we need. But there is such a long way to go in the world where just saying the word vagina is frowned upon. And
The danger is that people are too embarrassed to say that in a doctor's office as
mm,
well,
yeah,
right? So this is an issue that goes quite deep and across the board, and that can become quite dangerous.
yeah.
And we continue now with AI, we continue to see how that plays out. I put, those image generators. So Canva has one of those image generators, and I put ovaries into the image generator, and it was censored. So not even vagina, but just ovaries.
Wow.
And then I put in uterus, and it created an organ that's completely made up,
Mm,
just completely fake, nothing to do with the uterus. So it's not just the vagina, but it's all parts of the
women.
female anatomy.
Yeah.
And those are just body parts. Those are just parts of the female anatomy, right? So if you can't even say the word, and if you don't have the image for it. So one thing I've been asking women while I was writing the book is to show me how big you think your uterus is. So what would you do? Or how would you describe it?
I think it's like your fist.
Yeah. So most women actually go like this, I have found, but it's
Hmm.
but it's much smaller. So it's much closer to what you're saying. It's more like this size.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that is such an important thing to know, and nobody knows.
No, and we don't know how our bodies work. And the whole reason is because we've not been allowed to talk about our bodies. It's been censored. And I know, like Dr. Cisse, she says, she created the song, these are not bad words, and, clitoris, vagina, vulva. And it's like there's so many people now that are reducing that stigma, but it's still so strong and ingrained in our culture across the world that these are bad words. When we have young children, it's like we use acronyms for our body parts, but we don't do it for arms and legs and things. It's our sexual, or reproductive organs tend to be something we can't actually use the words for women's parts.
Yeah, that's right. And then you could say, well, those are private. And of course, that's absolutely true. But I think we have to draw a line between privacy and shame.
Yeah.
Privacy is important, but then shame is really an insidious force, because shame is how society gets away with things, right?
Yeah. And so when you were doing the research, I know that is it like 100 entrepreneurs, researchers, investments? Like you spoke to a lot of people.
That's right. So I've interviewed over 100 people, and they include entrepreneurs, researchers, investors, and other people in the space. And I've interviewed people across 15 countries, because it was important for me to show that good ideas and good projects, good innovation can come from anywhere, not just Silicon Valley and London and New York, but other places too.
Yeah.
We tend to think of Silicon Valley, we tend to think of those global centers, but actually it can come from anywhere.
Yeah. And I mean, I know I'm in the menstrual health space, so maybe I'm more aware of it, but it feels like even in the last 5 years, there has been so much more innovation when it comes to women's health. Usually by female founders and usually by female investors, but there is something happening in the space. And we need to, it needs to be broadened to, like you say, for maternal care, for menopause, across the whole scope of a woman's life, we need to have these investments. And unfortunately, the funding just isn't there at the moment.
Yeah, so you're right. About 80% of femtech founders are estimated to be female, which is
Mm.
really unusual for any industry, especially something that's part of tech. And we have seen an uptick in femtech companies. I think there are over 2,000 femtech companies around the world now. I also think there's been a lot of change when it comes to awareness.
Mm.
So when I started writing about innovation focused on female bodies, in 2019, nobody was really talking about perimenopause or endometriosis. Those were not terms that were on people's minds and in the
Mhm.
public discourse. Whereas nowadays, I think people are much more, not everyone, of course,
Yeah.
but you
The
do hear these conversations. Yeah. Yeah. The conversation is starting, and those are terms people are more likely to recognize. And then there has been some funding. The Gates Foundation has pledged 2.5 billion into women's health research. And there have been funds that have specifically been set up to invest in women's health startups. So things are definitely changing. I think we've seen a lot of momentum recently, and that is very inspiring.
It is really inspiring, and I think, it's come a lot later than it could have done, but the conversations are starting and change is starting to happen. And even though, perimenopause, thank you, Davina, for, making menopause more topical and discussed, and endometriosis. I definitely know that, there's been a lot more on the news about that, but we're recognizing what those words are, but are we got a full understanding of what that means for others, but especially ourselves? Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. But then at the same time, I think it's a collective learning experience. It's not like researchers know all of those things. Research is still catching up, and we're still coming up with new non invasive tests for endometriosis, and we're still coming up with new treatments for endometriosis. And with perimenopause, there's so many different symptoms, I think 43 of them at least, that people are looking into. So those are still topics that are being actively explored. It's not like researchers have solved them. One piece of feedback I get a lot from readers that I find so fascinating is a very particular phrase. So women will message me and they'll say, "I'm embarrassed by how much I've learned from your book." And I always think that's so interesting, that particular phrasing, because you didn't just say, "I've learned so much," but you said, "I'm embarrassed by how much I've learned." And I think there's something so revealing in that, because women are always shamed for, knowing something or not knowing something, learning something, not learning something, whatever we do. So I think it's important to say that we are in this moment of a collective learning experience where everyone, including those at the forefront of research, including those at the forefront of innovation, everybody's learning together.
Yeah. And it's exciting times that we are on. It feels like the momentum is there and change is happening and it can only go forward. And I know we've been stuck with many years of not talking about it. And like you say, people are suddenly like, oh my God, I'm so embarrassed that I didn't know this, but shouldn't be embarrassed that the research and the funding hasn't been there for us to have this information in the first place. There's so many barriers to even having this knowledge. Like you said, the censorship that we have out there. And we've got more social media these days, but if keywords are being censored from being found, then people aren't going to get the education. I think there's like a stat that's like now women get, is it something like 75 or 80% of their health knowledge from social media or their friends? But if that's not going to be there because it's been censored, there's a risk of misinformation or not fully being able to get the information that you need. Also, I know that money isn't going to, it hasn't been there for funding for research. How much do you think it is the lack of funding or the lack of care for women's health that is causing that?
Well, those twos are connected
Yeah.
because where you put your funding shows where your priorities lie, right?
Hmm.
Um, so only 4% of all healthcare research and development is focused on women's health issues. And in the UK, only about 2% of publicly funded research is dedicated to reproductive health and childbirth. Even though we are over 50% of the population, and even though childbirth is the most common reason for why we go to hospital, it's not something that's an unexpected event. Like, oh my goodness, somebody's having a baby. No, it happens several times an hour. So you'd think that it would be something that's really well researched, really well funded and prioritized. But unfortunately, that's not the case.
No, and I don't know if people have heard that stat before. I have, and it shocked me at the time. I'm sure people listening will be shocked to hear that so little is invested into women's health. And you, like you say, that we have periods, we go through menopause, we give birth. Like, we have a lot that we need investigating into our health. And it's like the pink tax, how I used to work for a pharmaceutical company back in the olden days. And it's like knowing that I used to have people say to me, like, can I have the pill for period pain? So I'm like, do you know that is exactly the same as just an ibuprofen? It's just got caffeine in, or it's just got, but it's packaged in a way that it makes it appealing for a
Yeah.
woman, and then they charge more.
Yeah. I've actually just created a reel about this. It's so funny you bring it up.
Yeah, so I used to work at Boots Pharmacy, and the amount of people, and I
Yeah.
kind of thought, should I be telling people? Yes, I should. Like, it's
Yes.
not just the
Yeah.
brand to the generic,
Yeah.
it's like women
Yeah.
paying
It's
more.
yeah. 10 times more. I looked at the specific prices. It's £5.40 Feminax and 60p for ibuprofen, and it's exactly the same thing. It's just that the packaging is pink. And what's even worse, there's a sort of cut off body of a woman on it that's headless. You just see her curves.
It's just a lot to unpack.
There is. Yeah. But I'm glad you bring this up because I don't think many people realize, but you should always look at the ingredients. The same goes for everything that's advertised with a women's health angle, like probiotics for menopause. If you look at the ingredients, you'll see they're just probiotics. So it's
Yeah,
it's
right.
always worth looking into the ingredients of
Yeah.
things. The other things are TENS machines. TENS machines are advertised as helping with period pain, and they do, but you can very cheaply buy one on Amazon for like £10. You don't have to buy one that's advertised for period pain for £80.
Yeah. The discrepancies are huge, and no wonder there's kind of a revolution happening.
I think what's really interesting about this, though, is another question, which is, women have been gaslit for so long. So if you go to a GP and you say, I've got period pain, they'll say, oh, that's normal. So there's actually a company or several companies that have decided to step into that gap and say, well, did you know you can take ibuprofen? Did you know you could use a TENS machine? So they are stepping into this knowledge gap that is a real gap. So you could, if you wanted to be contrarian, you could say, well, they're doing something helpful, but should they be allowed to charge 10 times more for that?
Yeah, and
Probably not.
it's the morals behind that. People are running businesses, but are you profiting on pain?
Yeah, exactly. How much of a premium should you be charging for
Right.
that kind of knowledge dissemination role? I think it's a really interesting question because it is useful to tell people you can use a TENS machine, even though, so the caveat with TENS machines is that there is a lot of peer-reviewed research that's been done on them. They do help with period pain, but most of that has not focused on endometriosis pain. So that's separate. And they also don't work for everyone. So I've used one in labor and I would say it's pretty weird. It's definitely not for everyone. It's quite an annoying sensation, I would say. But then if you look at the NHS website on TENS machines, it's only being updated every 3 years.
Mm,
And that's just not
yeah.
very frequent.
No, I have used TENS machines before. Personally, don't it distracts you a little bit, but it doesn't take away the level of pain that I got with my endometriosis. But like talking about the NHS website, until recently, they didn't even have a write up about adenomyosis.
Mm,
It's just simple things that, like say, it's not updated, it's not got the correct information, it's not even got some information about women's health on there.
yeah.
Shocking we are in this state where we are, but thank goodness there's people like you that are fighting to have these topics discussed and brought to the forefront of people's minds and really challenging that status quo. And I know that can be a really difficult job to fight back against the enormous pushback sometimes just over the word vagina. So if we're just doing that, there's a long way we have to go. But thank you for fighting and for writing the book and for keeping those conversations going.
Thank you so much. I mean, I can't think of many other conversations that I think are as important as this one. But I also think what inspires me is seeing the solutions and some of the answers in this space, which is why it was so important for me to cover the problems in the book, but then show people all those positive role models and all those success stories of how we can actually change things and how we can actually create new products, new research projects, new apps, and so on, new devices that people can use. Because I think oftentimes there's this ingrained attitude of like, oh, welcome to being a woman. This is just going to suck. Or, well, nobody's funding this, so there hasn't been anything new. People are quite resigned. But I think we can't change something if we've accepted it as the status quo. So we have to have that imagination of, no, it could actually look very different.
I think that is true that we have been gaslit for so long that it is like we just put up with. And that change is starting to happen. And I
Mhm.
think so long we've had the burden put on ourselves that we have to manage this ourselves. It's just pain, it's period pain, it's just childbirth. This is what you have to go through. And it's about creating the systematic change. So it's okay women advocating for their needs and looking into things that can help themselves, but we need kind of the bottom up, the top down. We need systematic change to come with this because we're so sick of fighting to be heard and to get these innovations for us.
Exactly. I think it has to be both. While the system is changing, and it is still changing, you have to advocate for yourself. It is, unfortunately, we still have to do that while the system is changing. And I think
Yeah.
the more people advocate for themselves and demand better options and question things, the more change we'll see, hopefully.
Yeah, hopefully, fingers crossed. This is a topic I literally could talk about not just all day, for weeks. Um, we're coming to the end. I wanted to ask you, with the Vagina Business, if that book could change just one conversation, what would you want that to be?
Well, the obvious one is that I want people to be able to talk about the female anatomy in a business setting and to put their money into these ventures, without embarrassment, without shame.
That's, yeah, such needed and such a powerful thing to want. So any businesses listening to this, you need to step up your game. You need to, you don't need to sit there with that mug and say vagina in your Monday morning meeting, but you do need to be having these conversations. You do need to know how to have empathetic, sensitive conversations with your staff. And that's just not women, that's men. It's allyship, it's creating everybody to be
Yeah.
involved to help.
Yeah. And I don't, it's not just investors, it's everybody else too. Researchers need to overcome that just as much. Nonprofits, that obstacle is pretty much the same everywhere. So yeah. And if you do sit there with your mug, even better.
I'm sure people will want to know how they can contact you, but also how they can buy your book.
Yes, yes, of course. So you can get it on Amazon. It's out in paperback and in hardback. You can also get the audiobook online on Audible and Spotify. And I've recorded it So I've narrated it myself. So you'll be able to hear me read it, and then you can get it at your local bookstore. Walk in proudly and say, "Where's the Vagina Business?" And they'll
Take a
show you.
megaphone. Yeah, take a megaphone and shout, where's the Vagina Business?
That's right, because it's quite interesting. It's always in different sections. Sometimes it's in science, sometimes it's in health, sometimes it's in business, because it's a very interdisciplinary book. So it's always interesting to see what section it's in. And I also have a newsletter on Substack if you'd like to see some of the more recent things that are coming out in women's health. I like to cover those once in a while. If you read the book and if you're brave, please read it in public, on the train, on your way to work, and also take a picture and tag me on social media and I'll repost it.
How can they tag you? What's your handle?
It's just at Marina Gerner on Instagram.
Excellent. Is there any other ways that they can contact your website?
Yeah, you can contact me through my website or through my Substack or on LinkedIn as well.
Excellent. I will share the links when I post this, but thank you so much. But I'm really grateful for the time that we've had today. And I hope everybody listening has been shocked by some of the things we talked about, because that shock factor can create that change. So yeah, for me, I think my lasting message would be talk about it, start having those conversations, even if it's with your best friend, or if you can do it at work, or like say, get that book out on the train, go buy the book and get it out when you're on your commute.
Thank you so much, Vicky.
Thank you. Take care.
You too.
Bye. Thank you so much for listening to Fully Told. If you've got any questions or you'd like to share your own story, I would love to hear from you. Get in touch at hello@pausefully.co.uk. And if you've enjoyed this episode, please help me keep making a difference by giving the podcast a follow, share, or leave a comment. If this episode has resonated with you, you will find a list of charities on my website where donations are very welcome. Find out more at pausefully.co.uk, and don't forget to explore the other episodes of Fully Told for more honest conversations and inspiring stories.